This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it. Guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Hello, this is Simon Brew. I'm the editor of Film Stories magazine, and a very warm welcome to a special episode of the Film Stories podcast.
Sorry about that. I literally had to fly in from outer space.
Come with me.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
And movies that had stories.
The story just sucks them in.
This is just the beginning.
Stories. We would be honored if you would join us.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to Film Stories with Simon Brew. I am Simon Brew, as always, everything you need to know about me. The aim of the podcast, though, well, I'm here to talk of the stories of film. The title gives it away. I tend to talk about development stories, production stories, marketing stories, making of stories, behind the scenes stuff, all the bits and bobs that go to make the films that we know and sometimes love. Just that, the films that we know and sometimes love. What you've happened upon here, though, is one of my special episodes where I bring in a guest to talk about their film work. I'm really delighted to be joined in this episode by director Michael Hoffman. Now, he's got an extensive body of work. Ostensibly, we're here to talk of the release on Blu-ray of his 1980s film Restless Natives, and what a cracking film that is as well. But also, in the course of the conversation you're going to hear, we'll be talking about films like Soapdish, Restoration, his work with Robert Redford, and taking his movies to Sundance. We get on to Gambit, which was written by the Coen brothers, and he took that project on. We'll also talk about the rom-com One Fine Day. We're basically going to go through his career and talk of the stories of making movies. A couple of people will mention. He talks about Downey a couple of times. That is indeed Robert Downey Jr. I talk about Colin. I did a little bit of an edit on that. I'm talking Colin Firth. I did actually forget his surname, much to the shame of my late great mum. Also, I should warn you, there's one or two F-bombs in the midst of this particular conversation, but it's not a particularly ranty or a particularly sweary one. It's just a chance to talk to a director of films I've really liked and enjoyed, just about his work and the stories of making them. I'm going to introduce the interview with a clip from Restless Natives, which is available now on Blu-ray as part of Studio Canal's excellent Vintage Classics collection. They didn't pay me to say that, but if they're listening and want to send me a check, by all means, I'm easy. But then once that little clip's done, we're going to go straight into my conversation with Michael Hoffman. I really hope you enjoy it. I thoroughly enjoyed talking to him.
The Highlands of Scotland, land of magic, myth and mystery, haunted by the ghosts of heroes past. Quiet now, quiet for centuries, quiet until... The most notorious public enemies since Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
I mean, my goodness, come in control! They're firing on us! I've been waiting for this all my life! Oh!
They are wanted by the law.
Police are today searching for two young Scots who held up and robbed a coachload of tourists.
They've got Glenn Orkey and Glenn Levitt blocked off.
How about Glenn Miller?
Hunted by the CIA.
We've made it. This is the big time. Oh!
And hounded by Angus's mother.
They're great, aren't they, Dad? They're really clever and they're brave.
You'll never catch those boys. They're far too clever.
That then was a clip from Restless Natives, which is storming back onto home formats. It's getting a brand new Blu-ray release. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined for this podcast special by its director Michael Hoffman. Hello, Michael. How are you?
Hey, hi, Simon.
Where do we find you, Michael?
I'm in London. I'm in London. No, I live in London. I live in Highbury. Yeah.
So your background is you were born in the US. You came and studied in the UK. Is that how?
Right. And then I was here for 10 years after university, and sort of started a film career. We started a film company with 3 or 4 partners, and then ended up going back to America, making some studio movies, raising my children in America, and then moving back here, and just recently got my visa that allows me to stay here for the rest of my natural life. Yeah.
Well, I hope that's for a very long time as well.
Yeah, I do too. I'm with you. I'm with you on that.
So, I mean, presumably you're in your 20s then when you started a small film company. Can you take to that bit of the story? Because I don't know any of this.
Oh, no. Okay. So, so I won a Rhodes Scholarship and I was studying at Oxford, and I'd been directing some theater there that had been relatively, in university terms, successful, and that what people were going to it. And I was involved with, OUDS and involved with OTG, which is OUDS at the Edinburgh Festival. And so anyway, someone came to me and said, would I like to shoot a 20-minute video?
Yeah.
And they really, I think they were most interested in that because I was, hooked up with a lot of the actors there. And I said, no, I'm really not interested in making film. I don't think I ever want to do that. I love the theater, and I thought I would be an academic at that point anyway, and in the history of theater. And, but through a strange set of circumstances, one of our professors, said we were having a glass of wine with him, and he said, I have a friend who's interested in film. And we said, who's that? And he said, his name is John Schlesinger. Yes. Boys like to meet him. So anyway, so we said, sure, and so John had just won the Oscar like a few years before for Midnight Cowboy. And he just had this kind of disastrous movie called Honky Tonk Freeway, in which he spent a huge amount of money and it was a complete bomb. Anyway, he sat down with us, and and he said, well, what could I do for your boys? And we were like, well, Mr. Schlesinger, could you read our script? And he said, no. If you want to make a film, you need lights, you need cameras, you need cutting facilities, I've spent so much money in this country on Honky Tonk Freeway. So many people owe me favors. I'm very happy to introduce you around. And so all of a sudden we had, free run of Berman's and Nathan's. We had all our lights for free from Lee's. We had our cameras half off from Sammy's. We had free run of Twickenham Studios to do all the post. And so we got some friends drunk at a kind of, party, and they ended up pledging 17,000 pounds. And so all of a sudden we had 17,000 pounds and all this sort of soft money, as it were. And so we had everything but a script. And so I went off, locked myself in a room and wrote this very bad screenplay. Came back and cast it with some of my friends and people I was acted with, who included Hugh Grant and Imogen Stubbs and James Wilby. And so we set off and we made this not very good film that ended up getting released all over the world.
And this was Privileged, was the film.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, very sad chapter in my life, but it wasn't, I'm teasing. It was fun. It was I learned a ton. It was great working with everybody, but I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I'd never seen, the first time in my life I saw a film camera, I was the director of a feature film. The first time I set eyes on a camera.
Good grief.
So, but, I just happened to end up working with, the guy who shot it was named Uli Steiger, who's gone on to shoot Roland Emmerich movies, and he and I ended up making 3 or 4 movies together. My girlfriend at the time was the composer Rachel Portman, who's won 2 Oscars.
Well, yeah, quite.
I've got one. Andy Patterson, who was the ADs, produced The Girl with the Pearl Earring and Railway Man and Hillary and Jackie. But just like everybody who was involved in it ended up going on to, have careers in the business, which was really kind of crazy. I remember the Daily Telegraph did an article about that some years ago, where they just had this line of all these faces from Privilege, it was like, and everybody was working, it was kind of crazy. So anyway, so that happened. And then I thought, okay, hopefully I've learned my lesson, and I'm not going to try to write about middle-class English people. I'm going to try to write about where I come from and what I know about. So I wrote this script called Promised Land, which ended up getting picked up and went to one of the projects selected for the second year of the Sundance Institute Directors Lab. And so that ended up sort of being my film school. And that was quite extraordinary. But in the meantime, well, not in the meantime, after that, before I got Promised Land made, what happened? We came back all inspired about what we'd seen at Sundance and thought we could do this at Oxford. We could go back to Oxford and get at Oxford College in the out of term and run a film lab.
Yeah.
And so we decided to do that. And as part of that, Lloyd's Bank was good enough to give us money to run a national screenwriting competition.
So you ran that. I was coming to this. You ran the competition.
Yeah, we ran the competition.
Okay.
And with the idea of the competition was to find 6 films that we would then take to the workshop.
Yeah.
But we also, the workshop, the Sundance-like workshop that we were doing it, we ended up doing it at Merton College for, I think, 3 years, which was really great. Had incredible people come along and work with the young filmmakers, including Bruce Robinson, which was a blast. But
tell me about Bruce Robinson.
What other than that, he's just a very bright, hilarious, ironic, iconoclastic, brilliant artist who's also just a great fun to sit and drink with. Anyway, that was the intention, was to, so that we would be able to workshop those films and just give the filmmakers a leg up like we'd been given at Sundance. But one of the prize, there was a cash prize for the winner, who was actually not chosen by us. We got it down to like 5. I mean, we had a huge number of entries. Like, I think there was 4 of us reading like 850 screenplays or some crazy thing.
Because that was rare in the UK anyway in the 80s to have an open screenwriting competition. That just doesn't happen. Yeah.
Absolutely strange. All over, anywhere in Europe, it was weird.
Yeah.
Because Sundance had only been going for like 2 years, and they really kind of pioneered that kind of. Yeah. That and the Nichols Fellowship at the Academy.
So just to get the chronology of this right,
sure.
Privileged was out in 82, and Promised Land that you talked about that you developed with Sundance was at 87, but your involvement with Sundance was
84.
84.
Yeah. So then came back from Sundance. God, I have to remember this now, how this worked. Because, it was at Sundance in 84. The summer of 84. Yeah. So we must have we ran the competition. How could this be? I must have been at Sundance in 83. We ran the competition, David Putnam chose the winner from the last 5. We had a short list of 5, gave them to David. He chose the winner. That winner was Restless Natives.
Yeah.
It was written under a pseudonym. We didn't realize that the person who wrote it was someone that we knew. Just didn't. I mean, we didn't know well, but he had just been at Oxford when we were there. And we didn't know him well at all. But had no idea he'd written it. As Ninian Dunnett, who wrote it, he just always claimed he really hated Oxford, and he was gone as much as he possibly could have. So no one knew him.
Yeah.
But anyway, he writes this thing, and one of the things that we'd pledged to do was to try to support the making of the winner.
Yeah.
Not to make it ourselves, just that we try to make connections to producers, money, whatever. But because we knew Ninian, and he said, I feel comfortable with you guys, maybe we should try to develop. Then we had a conversation one night about should we try to make it develop it into a feature, because it was only 33 pages long when he wrote it. It was a short. And he said, I'd like to try to work on that. So then we started working on the script. And then in the process of working on the script, we all got enthusiastic about making it. And then we stumbled into EMI with the script. And first people we showed it to said, we want to make this movie. And so all of a sudden we were making a movie, and off to Scotland to do it.
So it's an extraordinary start to a film career. I'd imagine you've not come close to anything that's ever repeated that confluence of circumstances ever since.
Yeah, it was a strange one.
I think that's incredible. I mean, just John Schlesinger at the start. What kind of advice does he give to someone who doesn't know they want to be a filmmaker at that point?
The thing about I suppose where John and I we had a major overlap, and we'd both been actors.
Yes.
And we both really felt comfortable with actors, and we sort of approached things with performance at the center. So I think we had that in common, you know, and so I never had, I had the advantage of having acted a lot, and so that, you know, helped a lot with that particular part of the filmmaking process. I mean, it ends up being a complex, multifaceted thing, as you find out. You never ever.
And at what point during the making,
get to the bottom of it?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Well, just to say, what point during the making of something like Privilege did you think, this is for me? This is actually directing films. Is just like
I didn't think that. I thought even after that, I didn't think I would do it, and I didn't. And I remember the editor, South African guy who was at the London Film School, and him saying, "Well, now you'll direct, and after this you'll direct another film." And I said, "Well, why would anyone let me direct another film after this?" And he said, "It's because now you're a film director. You don't realize it, but you are." And I was like, "Man, is that true?" And so then I got interested in the problems of cinematic storytelling, you know, because I'd initially written Promised Land as a play. And then I thought, oh, wait a minute, I'm intrigued by this. So I think I kept I was putting one foot in the lake and keeping one foot on the shore. And I did that for quite a while, to tell you the truth. I probably did that because I remember having a moment after, I think, the third or fourth film that I'd made after Promised Land, after Some Girls, Sisters. I thought to myself, I don't know that this is what I want to do with my life. I came from this very intense evangelical background, and I think there was a lot of stress put in my upbringing on serving others, and there was some part of filmmaking that made me feel like, okay, I'm not a genius at filmmaker, so what is it that I'm really giving to the world, by doing this? And I had a really crazy experience, because Redford had been another real mentor in my life. I mean, he really loved Promised Land, and he ended up producing it. And then he produced my next movie as well. And I went to see him. I was going to do an acting job in Florida, and I was driving across the country, and I went to his place at Sundance. He just happened to be there. And we had dinner, and I told him that I thought I was going to quit, that I was going to stop making films. Yeah. And he said, "Oh, okay, well, maybe that's right. I don't know. Whatever it is, you just keep going forward and learning about yourself, and things will get clear to you." And so he said, "But why do you stay in my house in Santa Fe when you're on your way down, and stay there for a couple of days, and it's a wonderful place, and you maybe, if you need time to think, it's a really good place to be." So anyway, he gave me the key to his house, and I went there, and I was staying with this lovely German woman that I was with at the time, although we weren't getting along particularly well. And I had this sort of notion that I was going to have some kind of spiritual encounter with, an Anasazi medicine man, or I was going to read pictographs or petroglyphs, and I was going to have some sign of, I'd be given some direction about what my life should be. And of course, absolutely nothing happened like that. And I was, and actually by the end of the 3 or 4 days we were there, we'd had a big fight, and I didn't want to go to bed. So she went to bed, and I was wandering around this house, and I found this little room, and there was nothing in this room. It's like it was like twice the size of a closet, except something like an 11-inch television screen. I mean, really 11-inch monitor, a VCR tape player, and these 6 tapes, which are the, Joseph Campbell's Power of Myth. Those, I don't know if you've ever seen those interviews that Bill Moyers does with Joseph Campbell about basically why human beings tell stories. And I sat up all night and watched these tapes. And at the end of it, I came away understanding that spending your life as a storyteller was plenty for anyone, and that if I had the opportunity to spend my life as a storyteller, that I was very lucky to be able to do that, and that I was going to do it. And then I just sort of committed to it, and I never looked back.
Good grief. And I'd imagine that because you were there at the infancy at Sundance, it was a much, much smaller deal at that point as a result of that.
Yeah,
more
both the
intimate,
festival,
and you got more access to the
lab has always been the same. The structure of the lab has always been the same. So, I mean, the lab is, look, there's 6 projects, maybe there's 8 projects. And if there are 8 projects, there are more advisors. So there, and so you've got, you've got 4 crews servicing the 8 projects. And so you've got then advisors. I've been there with incredible people, from Gus Van Sant to Philip Seymour Hoffman, Sally Field, Ed Harris. I'm trying to think who else. Alfonso Cuarón several times, Catherine Bigelow, Gorinda Chadha. I mean, so many people that I've mentored with. And so in every week you have like a different set of mentors, right? The mentors come in for a week and then they leave, and then another set come in and another set comes in. And so you're just constantly inundated with input. I mean, that's really what happens to you. But I don't think that's any different than it's ever been. The festival is really different.
Yeah.
Sundance Festival is a different thing. When I first had movies there, it was you kind of knew everybody, and there was a few agents around, but it wasn't really until Sex, Lies, and Videotape and Harvey that Sundance became transformed into, one of the 2 or 3 biggest festivals in the world. But so you're right. The festival was smaller. The Institute itself, which is like much more like a school, a training program, is very much what it's always been.
So, I mean, Restless Natives, I watched it for the first time this weekend.
Right.
For some reason,
it's fun.
It really is as well.
It's weathered the years quite well, I think. I mean, I'm very, very pleased when I've gone back to it to think, I mean, yes, of course there's huge flaws, but there's some fundamental energetic quality that it has that's generated by the performances of these boys, the quality of the writing, the Big Country soundtrack, this kind of aspirational quality with these sort of, that stuff I think really communicates.
One small thing at this point, a phone call came in, so we just had a brief pause in the conversation. I've done my best to edit it so it comes back as normally as possible in 3, 2, 1. I got through the end credits and saw the part that said there's a Lloyd's Bank screenwriting competition winner in there. But you hinted, I mean, you talked just before about how you decided you were going to make the film once whatever was going to win. So can you talk about how that came together? Because I mean, I enjoyed it enormously.
I'm trying to, I mean, that's his deepest, darkest. Like I said, I think that what I remember is, because it was a short, there was a kind of conversation about that always happens when there was short films, is like, what's the market for this? And so, and we didn't, so I think what we did, and if I remember correctly, the first very preliminary step was, well, why don't we sit down and maybe we can help you kind of rethink this as a feature, without any notion that we would be involved in making the film, more just as you have to understand at that point, we were just pretty committed to, we'd gotten very excited about what Sundance was doing and thought maybe we can do that here.
Yeah.
That was about all that was driving us. And then we started working on the script and we started coming up with more and more ideas, and the Robin Hood Bandits thing, and expanding it into, because it was as you can imagine, 33 pages. It was like one robbery and he fell in love with the girl, and that was kind of it.
Yeah.
And so, we introduced the Nigel character and all and the kind of bromance and Ronnie and Will splitting apart and coming together and all these sort of structural notions. And so then, I mean, I guess we must have just carried on developing the script. And at some point in that conversation, started talking about the fact that maybe we should all make it together. And then we sort of got to a script. I remember lots of script sessions. I remember script sessions in Edinburgh. I remember script sessions in Glasgow. I mean, script sessions down where I used to live a few blocks from here in Barnsbury. But I can't really remember the point at which we thought, okay, this is going to move over from a conversation about Ninian's script to a conversation about all of us making a film. But obviously it did at some point. And then I remember we got the script and I think we took it, we might have done something like, I know we didn't like do any kind of like, go out with it in wide anywhere, but I do think, so I think we just, EMI may have been the first place we went.
Yeah.
And they said yes. And so all of a sudden it was like, oh, I guess we're all going to go make a movie. Okay. So, so we did. So we went up to Scotland and we met Patty Higson, who'd, been the line producer on Gregory's Girl and That Sinking Feeling. And I can't remember if Comfort and Joy came before us or after us, but anyway, must have been after, because Local Hero was after too. Yeah. So yeah, we were just after Gregory's Girl, I guess. Anyway, so there was already a core of a really solid film crew, Bill Forsyth's crew, which we kind of inherited, and that was great. And I remember Patty thinking, I'm going to show them, Loch Lomond, and that will be enough for like the Highlands. And unbeknownst to her, Andy and I had taken a 2-week driving trip around the West Highlands, and I absolutely fell in love with this landscape. So I was like, no, if we're going to make this movie, we're going to go up to Fort William and we're going to do this properly. And that was more than anyone thought we'd have the budget for, but I went back and pitched that to EMI, and they gave us a little bit more money and allowed us to expand the scope of the production and gave it a real visual context.
I mean, the special thanks in the end credits are right down to the coach company as well.
Oh my God! Yeah.
I mean, it's just like the minutiae of the end credits is just brilliant. But also, I got a sense just from reading them that not only were you, I mean, it's a very location-driven film as well, but I got a sense
absolutely
it's a really community-driven film to a degree. That there were small companies helping you out. That there was goodwill behind it.
Yeah, tons. I mean, I think also it was a time when not so much film was still being made. Yeah. I mean, yes, it was after, the watershed moment was Chariots of Fire, but there still wasn't a lot being done, and certainly not a lot being done up in Scotland. So, people were really hungry for production. There was also enthusiasm because of the success of Gregory's Girl and the kind of pride that filmmaking community took in that, and the community as a whole. Community at large. So yeah, I felt like we were very much, and it was, even though I was an American, I mean, it was a Scottish crew and it was a Scottish writer and it was Scottish story and it was Scottish cast, and, and people were really happy that we cast local actors, that we didn't, there was a certain kind of expectation that we would bring British actors and have them do Scottish accents. And I decided that I didn't want to do that, that I felt like it was too delicate. The kind of naivete and tone of this film was just too delicate to absorb, that kind of inauthenticity. And partly because it demanded quite a light touch in a way, the film.
Yeah.
And I think it could have easily gone wrong. I mean, luckily, I think we get away with Bernard Hill with he would give himself a very hard time about his Scots accent, but it was funny. Apparently, the person I was talking to at the Scottish BBC was saying today that Bernard was up doing something on Scottish TV, and someone in the audience said, "You have to talk to us about Restless Natives." And he said, "Not the accent, not the accent." And they said, and the people said, and the person said, "No, you don't know how much we loved you in that and how much we appreciate it." So I think he felt better about that. Yeah. So, but I think it was, yeah, we had, I mean, there was tons of, right down to the way that, we had no budget for extras and, but we just had this crowd spontaneously form when we were riding through, when the boys were riding through Edinburgh, until it ended up to be quite a large number of people chasing them down the street when they, finally head off toward the Highlands from Princess Street. Yeah. And same in Westerhales, which was supposed to be this really, really rough neighborhood. And we found nothing but goodwill, aside from the fact this was funny. So we, they're throwing away around a lot of fake money. And those kids in Westerhales collected that money and managed to spend it all over Edinburgh and Glasgow in corner shops and stuff.
Your popularity soared at that
Yeah,
moment.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, when were you aware that this film had such an afterlife to it? Because I told a couple of people I was talking to you about the film. It's just like, oh yeah, I saw that late night on Channel 4. It's just like, and
I know. It's crazy. It's really, really. It's got, it has fan clubs all over the world. I mean, I remember I was calling James McAvoy trying to have a conversation with him about acting in this movie I made called Last Station.
Yeah.
And the reason he wanted to have the conversation was because of Restless Natives. He loved Restless Natives. And then I was at a party at Amy Pascal's house, and an Oscar party during the Last Station stuff. And I hear this voice next to me saying, "I'm not worthy." And I look over and Jerry Butler is on his knees in this thing, and it was because, of Restless Natives. And then I was talking to, I met with Jack Black I wanted to talk to him about acting in something. And I said, "It was so nice of you to take this meeting." He goes, "Are you kidding me? You made Restless Natives. That's my favorite movie." It's like, I want to remake that movie. So yeah. I mean, I keep running into it, and more. I don't know what it is. I don't know why it is aged. Maybe because it's pretty. I mean, there's something really basic about the underdog bromance kind of story and the aspirational quality of it, and it has a bit of a fairy tale quality. And then Ninian's voice as a writer. Ninian's voice is really, really distinctive. And then I think, we're always trying to contrast the simplicity of the way they saw the world with the bigness of the world that they were entering into.
Yeah.
And I think that somehow creates some emotional dynamic that people respond to. It's also very much, it's the, I don't know how much you are a fan of Shakespeare, but if you look at plays like As You Like It or Midsummer Night's Dream, you have these young people who leave the city and go to the green world, and in the green world, they're transformed. I mean, it has the green world kind of, mythic kind of underpinning. And I think that probably, I believe in those things very strongly. I'm very much of a Jungian in my approach to storytelling. So I really am a believer in those kind of archetypical patterns and how they function. And maybe that transcends the decades.
It's a terrific Blu-ray we're getting of it as well. I mean,
it's exciting.
It's really gone to town on that.
I know. It's really thrilling. And there's a very funny interview with myself, Andy, and Ninian, among others, and everybody has such lockdown haircuts. Oh my God, the hair is just shook. And you look very good, by the way.
Thank you very much. No one said that. I'm recording that. I mean, in the immediate aftermath of it, then your Sundance projects, your projects with Robert Redford came together, because I'm just reading. If I'm looking away from you, it's just because I've got the list on the other screen there.
Sure.
And you did manage to get Promised Land made. You did manage to get Some Girls made, and you had these 4 low budget films that you made in a period of about 5-6 years together.
Yeah.
And I just wonder what you can capture about that period, because the next jump that you made was quite a big one.
I don't know. I mean, it was very much a group of us. There was very much the people we were, the Oxford Film Company, which is still Oxford Film and Television, still make lots of things. But there was 5 of us, Rick Stevenson, myself, 2 Americans, and then 3 Brits, Andy Patterson, who I still work with a lot, who, as I think I mentioned, produced Hillary and Jackie and Girl with the Pearl Earring and my movie Restoration and Railway Man, among other things, and then Rupert Walters, who's a writer that I've worked with a lot, and a guy named Mark Bentley, who has continued on in Oxford Film and Television, making a lot of television with another friend of ours called Nikki Kent.
Yeah.
So we were all doing that, and it was very much of a commune. In fact, like on Restless Natives, we all got paid. We all had a job in the film. We all got paid, but instead, and of course, as a director and producer, I, on paper, got paid more than other people. But we decided just to pool the money, work as a collective, split the money 5 ways, and so it was very, very. And we all lived in the same house. We all, we just were developing things together and trying to learn, about how to do it. And so, I wrote Promised Land, and Rupert wrote Some Girls, and then it was just the kind of natural progression, I guess, of like, we were all getting into our early 30s, and people were getting into relationships, and people were moving out, and I went to America and ended up getting, offered a studio job, and so I took it, and then I ended up getting married and staying there for a while. But so it was a very organic coming together, an organic process of making those movies together, and strangely, and kind of an organic coming apart.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is we all have stayed very connected with each other. And, my godson, Rupert's son, Roland, is in the film business now. He's my godson. And he's working on a movie with my son, who's also making films in America. Everybody's lives and families are still very tied up together, which is wonderful.
There's a distinct lack of punch-ups in these stories that I've noticed. It's very fun. I mean, the film that
we didn't have many punch-ups.
The film that you went to America to make, the studio picture you talked about, is Soapdish, a delightful ensemble comedy. But the jump, fun. I mean, I've been reading archive interviews that you did around that about how this one film cost more than your previous 4 films put together.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And how I think it was Herbert Ross was originally set to direct it, and it was set up at another studio once upon a time. So can you talk about the offer coming in, what position that project was in at that point?
Well, the position, I mean, actually, it was a very different world than exists in Hollywood now. I mean, it was very, people studios wanted to foster a relationship with directors. And one of the ways they did that was they would, get you involved in a development deal. And it wouldn't necessarily even be for a movie they thought they were going to make. Like, I don't believe that they really, when I got involved with Soapdish, they intended to make it. And I didn't intend to make it either. I was trying to make a little, I mean, I don't know if you know the American short story or writer, Richard Ford, but I was involved with a short story of his that 2 friends of mine, which is amazing now, Howard Gordon and Alex Ganza, fresh out of Princeton, who ended up being, the people who did Homeland and the people who did 24. But they were just like these young guys who had liked my movies, and they just wanted me to work with them on doing this Richard Ford story, which was kind of like Promised Land. It was set in the middle of America, where I'm from, or in the West, and it was a kind of very austere, poetic, beautiful little story. Anyway, I was putting all my emphasis on getting that made, and to keep my agent happy more than anything, I took the development deal with Paramount, which, they paid you $12,500 to, have meetings with the writer. So anyway, I read the script. I thought there were some good things in the script, some very good things, and kind of the bones of at least 2 acts of a structure that was potentially workable. Yeah. But I didn't really I didn't want to make a mainstream comedy at that point. It was just not in what I thought I wanted to do. But I went and met with the writer Bobby Harling, who had written Steel Magnolias, who is now a very, very dear friend of mine. And we sat down, and I gave him a set of notes, which were very different from what the script was and what Herb Ross had initially wanted to do. And I think Bobby was burnt out and tired and sort of went, I don't know if I can do this right now. And so I went to producer Alan Greisman and said, maybe we have to look for another writer as well. I mean, there's lots of great stuff in here, but I think Bobby is just not up for it right now. And so we ended up hiring Andy Bergman, a fucking funny guy. And Andy really did some incredible work on the first 2 acts of the script. But still we were kind of like, okay, so we had a read through in what must have been like July of 19, or maybe it wasn't July, maybe it was the spring of 1990. And it was like clear that, and I'd been casting all along, right?
Yeah.
I'd been, Sally Field was cast. Kevin Kline was a dance. It took me forever and ever to convince Kevin to do it, but it finally did. Downey, I'd gotten to know on another project, and I was just like desperate to find things to do with Downey. So that was kind of, even though the studio really didn't want Downey, I really had to fight to get that piece of casting, which just seems ridiculous now.
Well, that story followed Robert Downey Jr. for quite a while as well, didn't it? It was so trying to cast him in anything for about a decade was near impossible.
Yeah, well, I managed like 3 times. I love Downey. Downey's one of the greatest human beings and most wonderful actors you ever have a chance to collaborate with.
There is a story that you
special.
Sorry, there is a story as well that you lured in Pretty Woman director Gary Marshall just over lunch to
I did do that.
Take a role. Is that right?
I did do that. Yeah. Yeah, that was great. Yeah, we had lunch about something else, and I was like, you're fucking funny, man. You come and do this. And he's like, well, and actually some of the most memorable lines several of the most memorable lines in the movie are improvs of Gary's.
Yeah.
That line that was on the T-shirt, the crew T-shirt, we don't want it depressive and expensive, we want it peppy and cheap. That was just a line that Gary improved.
Was it a fun film to make? Because the ensemble is incredible, and I know there were stories about lots of reshoots and bits and bobs like that, but I never read stories that this was a troubled production or anything like that.
Well, it was troubled for very specific reasons that had nothing to do with the cast, and there really weren't. There were absolutely on that. I mean, I've done many movies that have many reshoots, but Soapdish, we didn't reshoot a single frame of anything.
Interesting.
No, I mean, unlike Restoration, for example.
I
reshot probably as much. I probably did spend as much money in reshoots as I spent on the whole initial shoot. It was crazy.
How so? What was the?
I'll tell you when we.
Okay. Yeah.
Restoration. Oh yeah, it was crazy.
But
Soapdish. No, Soapdish was one of those movies that, we came out in the first preview. The studio was watching the dailies, thought I was out of my mind.
Yeah,
I know they did. They told me afterwards. It's like we were looking at the shit, going, "What is he doing?" But then when they saw the movie cut together, they liked it. And then when we had a first preview, and people were literally, and I'm not kidding you, and I'm not one to blow my own horn about stuff generally, but there were literally people falling out of their seats into the aisle. They were laughing so hard. I mean, it was unbelievable. I'd never seen anything like it. It was such a pleasant experience to sit there with those executives, seeing how much people liked the movie, or at least how funny they thought it was.
Yeah.
So that was, so actually, was it, you asked me if it was fun. I don't think I knew how to have fun making a film at that point in my career. I think everything was, someone once said to me, I think I said something like, I don't know if I'm a glass half full or a glass half empty kind of personality. Said, oh, I know, you're a glass half full of poison. And all I could see was potentially what wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just always in a panic about not getting it right, not doing it well enough, not making it funny enough, not making it, matter in some way. I mean, it was just very, very, I used to literally throw up before going to the set every day, every single day. And then there was a certain point in my career where all of a sudden I went, hang on. I mean, it was interesting. I was watching this really great Q&A between Francis Coppola and might have been Steve Soderbergh. I can't remember, at the end of the reboot of the last reboot of Apocalypse Now.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how miserable he made himself when he was making the Godfather movies and The Conversation and Rain People. And he said, I just made myself so unhappy. I mean, I made during Apocalypse Now, all I could think about was what wasn't going to work, how it, this was going to be taken away from me, how I was going to be fired, how I was going to be. Yeah. And he said, it did take me a long time to realize this is heaven right now.
Yeah.
You're on a movie set, you're being this is heaven. It's not something that's going to happen later. It's not going to happen. It's like you can spend your time making your experience of your life into hell, which I did for a long time, or you can make it into heaven. But that's all there is. So you just as well choose the heavenly option.
I told you just before we started chatting that I walked past a huge queue of people waiting to see Terminator 2 when Soapdish came out in the UK, and had an absolute ball with it. And that's another one that seems to have had legs to it as well. That
Soapdish has had a long life. Yeah. It's on all the time. Yeah. HBO for some reason plays Soapdish constantly, and good for them.
And so it was 4 years after that then that you came to Restoration, which my first recollection of Restoration was I just seem to remember that being picked for being the royal film that year. And that was a big deal at the time.
Yeah, so it was the 100 years of British cinema.
That was it.
Yeah,
that was it.
Yeah. And
that's a bit of pressure, wasn't it?
Charles K. Oh, yeah. I mean, it was quite. It's amazing. It's an amazing experience because it was also an experience of working with Harvey, which was something.
Weinstein, we're talking
unforgettable. About. Yeah. And Harvey was in addition to all the other things that are maybe kind of beyond questionable. He was a very passionate filmmaker, and he really believed in the movie and so that was a double-edged sword. That meant both that he would support it and also that he wanted it very much to succeed with a wide audience, and it put a lot of pressure on the movie, and it produced a kind of endless post-production process where we just kept going back and reshooting to try to make it a little better and get the numbers up and find a way into the audience. And so it was over time, it became exhausting. And I don't know really if I believe that the final film that we released was the best version of the film.
Yeah.
But there's still a lot of things in it that I really love. And I love Robert Downey's performance very, very much.
Yeah, I do have to make a point whenever his name comes up on the podcast of just acknowledging that he's a convicted rapist and all the terrible things that he's done. I appreciate he's part of a filmmaking story, but I do always make a point of that.
Well, no, that's fair enough. I mean, and I don't mean, and I absolutely acknowledging that.
Oh yes, of course you are.
Enthusiastically, I'm just.
He's wrapped up in so many stories of 90s films.
It's impossible not to talk about him if you're talking about movies.
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the
I mean, a
80s
film
and
I love.
90s. I don't know how you.
A film I love is Brassed Off, and I listened to a Q&A with the director of that one, it's Mark Herman, and he talks about the fact that he was pivotal to that film. It's like, how do you change that bit of history? It's just like, you can't. But he's done these awful, awful, awful things that are utterly unforgivable, and so that's why I kind of just make sure I just mention that just in the midst of it all.
Sure.
I remember that the film being picked for the Royal Film that year was a huge thing, and I'd forgotten it was the 100 years of cinema and all that celebration. And we had a national cinema day. I remember that, where we could go and watch films for £1. I remember.
Exactly. Yeah, Charles came to the screening and.
I mean, did you enjoy the pomp of that? Was that? I mean, that's an honor, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I did. Of course, it was fun, but I think I always felt with that particular film that it should have been more than it was, and that those things were that was fundamentally my fault. Rose Tremaine's novel that it's based on is a brilliant book. I mean, a really brilliant book. And I think that in some ways I got so caught up in the look of the movie and how to approach the movie visually, which I think obviously we did a creditable job because it won the Oscar for production design and costume design. But I don't think I ever really came to grips with finding a way to take a picaresque story like the novel is and apply a kind of film structure that really made it sing. And there were some other things that were complicated that had to do with the story's narrated in the first person. And so you're very, very close to a kind of morally ambiguous character. And somehow, because of that, I think it blinded me a little bit to what the audience did and didn't understand about the protagonist, if you see what I mean. Because it was in my head. In the book, 400 pages of his voice was in my head. And so I was projecting onto certain things, images, what I thought was readable for the audience that I'm not sure was. So I think it was complicated on that level as well. And then there's another bigger issue. It's like, so in the end, it's about this guy who has a gift for medicine, doesn't embrace it, eventually ends up back in London during the plague of 1666. And he's confronted with the situation as a doctor in the midst of the bubonic plague, where in fact he can't really do anything.
Yeah.
Because no one could do anything, because there was nothing to do, nothing there's nothing before antibiotics that make any dent in the bubonic plague. I mean, they're just, they didn't. And so it meant that at this point where you've traveled this great distance with a protagonist who needs, because of the shape of the story, to find some sort of redemption, it was very hard for him to find any kind of redemption by exercising this gift that he had, because he couldn't really exercise it because no one could exercise it during the plague. So it just, I just remember these moments when Harvey would say, why can't he cure the plague? I'm like, he can't cure the plague, Harvey. He can't cure the plague because no one could cure the plague.
Your next project afterwards, I'm going to quote a book back at you here, because I've been reading Linda Obst's book, Hello, Lied. And she produced, that comes across in the book. She produced your next film, One Fine Day. And she says a few bits and bobs in there about you. She says you're quite picky about the stuff that you do. She makes a point.
I had a reputation for, the fact that after Soapdish, a movie that was like the best reviewed and one of the most successful movies at Paramount had that year, the fact that I didn't work for 4 years was simply because, I don't know why, but I turned down, I went 1 5-year period where I'd turned down one of the movies nominated for Best Picture 5 years in a row.
What kind of films were you turning down?
I don't know, what Cider House Rules, The Truman Show, I can't remember. Many. It was a different world.
Yes, very much.
Disney was making 30 movies a year.
Yeah,
I mean,
that was the Katzenberg ethos, wasn't it? Getting new film in cinemas every week.
But Warner Brothers was making. I bet they probably made more than 30 movies a year.
Yeah,
I mean, there were so many jobs, and so if you'd said no to whatever the FedEx truck brought one day, there'd be another one. There'd be another script the next day. And I lived in a world completely blind to how lucky I was.
Yeah.
And afraid, I think, that I wouldn't know how to repeat the success of Soap Dish. It became a little bit of an impediment.
Interesting.
For me. So I held this thing up called Restoration, which was like, okay, I'm only going to do this. I'm only going to focus on this. Thinking on some level, I think that it would never get made because it was a very difficult movie to get made.
Yeah.
We had Daniel Day-Lewis attached to it at one point. We couldn't get it financed then Ken Branagh was attached to it. Finally, it came together because of a combination of things, Downey, Meg, whatever. But so that I did learn a lesson. I at least was smart enough to not repeat it and to go immediately from Restoration to One Fine Day.
Well, she makes some interesting points about One Fine Day as well, in that you had an unusual rom-com in that the male lead in that film was basically taking the supporting boyfriend role in it. And she said,
absolutely. Hard to cast.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you can talk to that, because she's talking of all the names who would turn it down because they just wouldn't consider playing second fiddle.
Well, I mean, but again, it was the studio that was interested in thinking we've got to make an offer to Tom Cruise, we've got to make an offer to Kevin Costner. I was more concerned about who was the right person to play that role. So, there were other people I was really interested in. There were certain people I was arguing for early on, Kevin Kline among them, that the studio wasn't willing to embrace. And then it as often happens, it's like sifting, right? And then all of a sudden it emerges this notion of, what about George Clooney? What about George Clooney? He's going to break. He's the biggest TV star in the world. Like, something's going to happen. He feels like a movie star. And then I met him and I loved him and Michelle loved him. And then it was great. I mean, it's very hard to imagine it any other way.
But Michael Hoffman, let me put this to you. You also broke him, according to this book. Page 180, page 185 of this book talks about you playing basketball with George Clooney.
Oh my God.
And sending him back to the set of ER with a black eye.
Back. Yeah. Well, back to my own set. I didn't deliver the fatal elbow. I was playing in the game, but yes.
Is this your case for the defense?
George ended up with a broken. I mean, this bone broken. I don't know what you call it. The bone beneath your eyebrow.
And he'd just been cast as Batman as you cast him, hadn't it? You cast him and then Batman followed.
Oh, absolutely. And he never stopped. He would always show up on set saying, "I'm Batman."
He didn't do that the year after. No. I mean, but also, I mean, it struck me. I mean, if we go back to Restless Natives, where you're shooting in the middle of Scotland, surrounded by onlooking crowds. Now with this one, if I've got this right, because I remember going to see on One Fine Day it came out. It's just like I remember looking at it. It's just like, how on earth did they film that? Having two hugely recognizable stars basically going across a busy city, because you didn't fake that, did you?
No, you can't fake that.
No.
No, I don't know. How did we do that? I don't know. I mean, great AD department, I guess. And a lot of, owning key clumps of your own extras, knowing exactly where your people were.
Yeah.
So that you're like creating a kind of gauntlet for the actors to run.
Yeah. And I mean, what I also remember of that was one of the 3 George Clooney films that because he did The Peacemaker around the same time.
He did, right?
And you were all just bunched in together, these 3 films.
Because we had to get him out. We had to get him out to Yugoslavia, the former Yugoslavia, wherever they were shooting. They were shooting wherever they were shooting. Mimi Lederer was shooting Peacemaker.
Yeah. And I should acknowledge as well, I think Michelle Pfeiffer is brilliant in One Fine Day, and
he is absolutely stunning. Stunning.
And not enough lead roles went her way. And
she was a producer on that movie. I went to Martha's Vineyard and met with her and told her I really wanted to make the movie. And we had a long conversation about kids. I think I wanted to make the movie partly because I had 2 little kids. I had one a 3-year-old son and another one on the way, and she had 2 little kids. And so, you know, it was a whole colony of people on that movie that had little children. Yeah.
But what struck me
Not
about your work in the 90s as well, it's just like all sorts of stories of directors falling out with actors and never working with them again that I've come across throughout the years I've been doing this. And then, I mean, you go and make a cut. I mean, your actors come back to you. So I mean, just look at the cast of A Midsummer Night's Dream. That was extraordinary.
Yeah, that's an amazing cast.
You know, Kevin Kline back, Michelle Pfeiffer back, and then Kevin Kline again, because it was, as you said before, it was always supposed to be difficult to get Kevin Kline to commit to a film.
To anything.
And yet he's done lots of your films.
Yeah,
so
I've just got him committed to doing a TV series that I'm in the middle of writing now.
Incredible. Well, I mean, can you talk to, because you've clearly got a passion for Shakespeare as well. I always get that from your stuff.
I do.
Can you talk to being able to put a big screen version of A Midsummer Night's Dream with studio money, really?
Well, I mean, you know, I think they were open. I mean, I remember calling Lindsay and Claudia Fox Searchlight and saying, you know, if I could deliver Michelle Pfeiffer and Kevin, would you guys be interested in doing this? And it was like crazy. I said, if you give me if you pay me to write a draft of the script, I'll write it. I can write a draft of the script because I directed the play. I'd been in the play 3 times.
Yeah,
I basically knew it from memory, and I had some ideas about what I thought I might want to do. And so I said, if you give me give me a little money to write it, I'll have you a script in a month. And if I can deliver these actors, would you green light it? And they said, yeah. So it was like the easiest movie to put together I've ever done by a long way. It was so simple. It was like a couple of phone calls, and they liked the script, and I got the actors to say yes, which is not more because of Shakespeare certainly than because of me. And so that was it.
And then appreciating, I'm pushing my time. There's just 2 more films I want to touch on, really, because you went back to Sundance in the mid 2000s then for Game 6 with Michael Keaton.
Well, yeah, I did. That's right. Yeah, was it? Yeah, 2005 Sundance, I think it was, or maybe it was 2006. You're right. It was 2005. So was that a case of
a passion? Because I mean, the movie industry was turning by that point. The DVD money was starting
completely. No. I created. Okay, so I was involved with that film in 1997 or something like that when it was at Universal.
Yeah.
And it was quite clear that big Universal was never going to make that movie. It was just too weird and too little for them.
Yeah.
So then, some years later, myself and a producer named Michael Nozick, a producer named Leslie Ordang, and a producer named Amy Robinson formed a company called Serenade, and we got $2.5 million and decided we're going to make 5 films with that money.
Right. Okay.
And so we went back and negotiated with Universal, and Amy had a very good relationship with Universal, and they gave us the rights to do, because they wanted to keep Don DeLillo. They were happy to make him happy, and he wanted to do it. So we said, okay, we're going to make this movie a period movie in Manhattan for $500,000. And we did. We fucking did it, man. I'm amazed when I think how I did, traffic jams with 6 cars and terrible, like, primitive special effects, and then having that act, the joke was Michael Keaton was like, he doesn't have a trailer, he has a stool. He literally had this little 3-legged stool that he would sit outside in the street in New York and just talk to people when they walked by while we made the movie. It was kind of amazing, an amazing cast. Downey, just out of prison, came and did it, and Griffin Dunn and Amy and Bebe Neuwirth and Catherine O'Hara and Ari Grainer. I mean, it's an incredible cast, actually, when I think about it. Harris Yulin, who I love. Roger Rees, who I adored, who I made 3 movies with, who was a dear friend of mine. God bless him.
And you shot
Yeah.
it in under 3 weeks or so. I was reading.
Yeah. We did. It's crazy. We shot it 3 weeks. I don't know how we did it in August in Manhattan. It was insane. And the way the model worked was everybody from me to the T-boy, as they say, in this country, got $100 a day, and that was it. And everybody just got paid $100 a day, and everybody from me to the T-boy owned a piece of the movie.
Well, $100 pays for a 3-legged stool for Michael Keaton. That's
exactly
what he spent his on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He is a pleasure. Keaton is a doll.
Everything I read about it just sounds like a delight, and
it was fun. It was really fun, just like a challenge.
And then following that, I know you've been talking about the loss of Christopher Plummer recently and how you directed him in The Last Station, and you've written some love. I read the piece you wrote in I think it's the Guardian there, which I thought was really delightful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, he's great. I love Chris.
Then you did a Coen Brothers script and painted a nice target on your back for daring to tackle one of theirs.
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing on that, I'm reading the biography of Mike Nichols at the moment. I'm talking about the film Gambit here, and what's really interesting about it, because you did some interviews around the time of making Gambit about directing commentary, and reading the Nichols biography. Directing comedy and reading the Nichols biography is fascinating about how surgical a process that could be. And when you're working with actors like Alan Rickman, the Cameron Diaz, and Colin, But because by that point you directed a fair amount of comedy throughout your films, but I'm just curious what the experience of that film was when you've got people who bring that much to it, but also you're bringing a lot of expertise yourself.
I don't know. I mean, I sort of saw it as this old-fashioned caper farce thing, so I was interested in. Now, there's sequences in the movie that I really like. There's sequences that I think don't work, but there's a whole sequence in the hotel, in the Savoy Hotel, that I really love. It was one of the reasons that I wanted to do the movie, because I really liked that sequence in the script. But I think that the script, one of the things that I found challenging in that process was, because it was a Coen Brothers script, and because they're so iconic and so brilliant, there was a lot of resistance to doing any change work on the script. And there were certain things that I think we'd have been better, that the script could have used. And the pushback from producers was quite extreme about not changing this iconic document. And I think that one of the things that for me is slightly problematic is it kind of lacks a movie like that, where you've got two characters who are so different from each other, but need to somehow make a connection. I mean, you really need that kind of classic Hollywood, meet cute scene between the two of them where, they're oil and water, right? Yeah. I mean, they were oil and water, but they were oil and water at a distance. There was never this scene where you understood the fundamental connection, the frisson between them.
Yeah.
It wasn't in the script.
And that script had been around for 10, 15 years, hadn't it?
Yeah. It wasn't in the script. And there was a lot of talk about it. And because it wasn't in the script, legitimately, Cameron and Colin couldn't quite find what was telling them they definitely had something more than a relationship of two very unlikely characters that becomes a kind of friendship or connection over the course, as opposed to something that was like a screwball romance. And because the script didn't really support that, but somehow it needed to be that. I think I still kick myself for not having just put my foot down and said, I don't care. This has to be rewritten, this scene.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's, I don't know. There's many conversations to be had about Gambit and what works and what doesn't. But I do think that one kind of basic structural issue is major.
I mean, if I can round up by just bringing it to the present day, because you directed Nick Sparks' adaptation, The Best of Me, that was well received.
Yeah.
You've done a short film, Our Love Is Here to Stay, but also I'm curious what your tell me about that, because
that was literally something.
Huge grin on your face. Just
no, it was just something that we did improvise at the National Film School. It was kind of a teach it, show them how to make a movie during COVID film, but it actually has a kind of charming, there's a sort of charming approach to it, and people have kind of liked it. It's a tiny little thing we made in a minute. I teach at the NFTS.
I was going to say, that's you going full circle, isn't it? That's doing what Schlesinger did for you.
Yeah, I like to teach. I do. I teach quite often. Yeah.
So you've got, I mean, you've got a film that you completed that looks like it will never be released, which is Gore, with Kevin Spacey.
It's called Dear Mr. Vidal. Yeah.
And is it a case of we will never see that because
I don't know. I hope not. I would go out on a limb and say, and I don't know that, how many people this is going to excite, but it's in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of the small number of people who've seen it, by far and away the best film I've ever made. I really love the movie, and it's really about something, and I really hope it gets seen. It has some very, very good performances. Michael Stuhlbarg, who plays Gore's longtime companion, is absolutely brilliant.
So this is the Gore Vidal story, and the reason it's been buried is because allegations about Kevin Spacey rose just after it was finished, by the sounds of it. Is that right?
Just after it's finished, yeah. And so it's been a very frustrating situation, because it's a movie that I think, if nothing else, it has because of what it's about, has a real place in the whole Me Too, Time's Up debate, because it's about a situation between a younger novelist and an older man who falls in love with them, and what they want from each other, how they try to get what they want from each other. It's very complex in movie about what we barter for what in the marketplace of life. It's very, it's quite I think the movie's, it may be too nuanced for the current environment, but I do have a lot of faith that it's quite truthful.
And where then does this all leave you now? What projects are you developing?
Lots of things. Yeah. I have a wonderful script that I really, really love, that I think it's based on a book of history by a wonderful Cambridge historian named Linka Rublik. It sounds, when you say it's a movie about Johannes Kepler, you have to be careful that people don't gnaw it off, but it's about a very specific moment in Kepler's life when he was imperial mathematician to the Habsburg court, and back in this little town in Germany he grew up in, and spent his life trying to get out of. His mother was accused of witchcraft at the height of the witch trials, and he went back. And this was a woman who was both, on some deep level, his most profound inspiration and his most profound frustration, and he goes back to try to save her. And it's Helen Mirren is playing the mother, and Andrew Scott. The Kepler, and so I'm very, very excited about.
And is that close to?
I think we're coming. We're getting there. Yeah.
Well, I look forward to seeing it.
And then I've got this, a TV series I make with Kevin Kline. Another script I just finished that I just have an actor attached to who I love and I'm very excited about, that I can't talk about yet. So I've been writing a lot, and things are rolling along, and they will. It's been, I think it's been hard for everyone this last stretch, and I'm just very much looking forward to going back to the cinema, going back to the theater, getting back behind a camera.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
Amen to that. Michael
Awesome.
Hoffman, thank you so much for your time. This has been an absolute delight.
Yeah,
Take
it was a
care.
pleasure.
Thank you for indulging me.
Thank you very much.
Time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. And that brings me to the end of my conversation with Michael Hoffman. As you can probably tell, we recorded that one over Zoom. I thought the audio quality was good for Zoom as well. A few little beeps of phones going off and things like that, just because we're all in lockdown at the moment. But generally, I thought we pretty much got away with that. I'm hugely grateful too for Michael Hoffman's generosity with his time and tolerance of my technical issues, which I won't go into, but it just to say it required a good deal of good nature and charm on his part, which he was more than happy to provide, to put up with the fact that I couldn't get things to record for a little bit. You can get more of my witterings on Twitter at Simon Brew. You can get more from the entire Film Stories project at Film Stories Pod. There's a website as well, filmstories.co.uk, updated every weekday with stories and news and reviews and things like that. You can buy all of our print magazines at store.filmstories.co.uk. But perhaps most importantly for this podcast, you can get hold of Restless Natives now on Blu-ray. It's genuine what I was saying in the podcast. I hadn't seen it before. I had really a lot of fun with it. That's available to buy from Studio Canal on the Vintage Classics label. With that in mind, I'm just going to bring this podcast to an end, and thank you as always for listening. Thank you for your support, and I'll be back soon with your regular episode of Film Stories. You all take care. Bye bye.